can scratch that one.
Scratch that one off. Okay, thank you. And so that solves that problem for us. Okay, the first item on the agenda, and the only item that we have on the agenda today, is the hearing on Senate Bill 52. And would the advisors give us a breakdown?
Good afternoon, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee. Amelia Kovar-Donahue, Assistant Revisor. And the bill before you today is Senate Bill number 52, and it would create the Kansas Film and Digital Media Production Development Act. The act provides tax incentives for eligible projects produced in Kansas for the purpose of developing the film and digital media industry in the state. The act would be administered by the Secretary of Commerce, with the assistance of the Kansas Creative Arts Industries Commission. Projects would need to be approved by the Secretary of Commerce, and the act would commence July 1st, 2025, but no income tax credits or sales tax exemptions would apply to production or post-production expenditures made after 2034. The act would provide two things: an income tax credit for production companies based on a percentage of production or post-production expenditures in Kansas as approved by the Secretary of Commerce. And also there is a sales tax exemption for production or post-production expenditures. This again is a bill that is heavy with definitions. So Section 2 provides those definitions to you. And so you should be able to see there, I'm not going to go through in great detail, there's definitions for production expenditures and post-production expenditures. And then within those, there are further definitions of things like what Kansas-based means, as well as eligible projects, above-the-line personnel, and things like that. The income tax credit itself for production companies, the income tax credit would be for tax years 2025 through 2034. And they are based on the amount of production or post-production expenditures made in Kansas by the production company that are approved by the Secretary of Commerce. Please note that the income tax credits are based on certain percentages of qualified expenditures, and there are definitions of qualified expenditures, but the main point is that they are expenditures that meet the definitions and that are approved by the Secretary of Commerce. The tax credit is applied against the production company's income tax liability for the tax year in which the expenditures were made, and excess amounts of tax credits may carry over for deduction in the next succeeding years, but not after the 10th succeeding year. The income tax credit also is transferable, and excess amounts of those credits may carry over for deduction in succeeding years, but not after the 10th year for the transferee. Claims need to be made within a year of the date of the last eligible expenditure, and there is a limit on the aggregate total amount of income tax credits allowed. The limit is $10 million per tax year. The provision also provides that 10% of the total aggregate shall be designated for Kansas-based production companies. The maximum cumulative amount of all income tax credits awarded to a production company for a certified project for a particular tax year shall not exceed 40% of the total qualified production expenditures or post-production expenditures. And then prior to the receipt of any income tax credit, the Secretary of Commerce will need to examine the expenditures and other evidence provided by the production company to determine their compliance with the Act. The Secretary would notify the production company and the Secretary of Revenue of their determination of qualified expenditures as well as any disqualifications. The next section of your bill brief actually outlines the different provisions relating to the amount of income tax credits. First of all, the basic credit is an amount equal to 30% of the qualified production expenditures or qualified post-production expenditures of the production company. There is an additional credit available for up to 5% of qualified production expenditures for a certified multi-film deal, eligible television series, high-impact production, or contributions to film-related infrastructure or workforce development. There's also an additional credit available for up to 5% of qualified production expenditures if 50% or more of the crew or above-the-line personnel are Kansas residents. In addition to those amounts, there's also a credit of up to an additional 5% of qualified production or post-production expenditures for a certified project that has previously received an income tax credit under the Act. Also, there is a special or additional tax credit of 25% of qualified expenditures for a Kansas-based production company that incurs at least $25,000 in qualified expenditures. And this provision includes productions that are not intended for multi-market distribution. So turning to sales tax exemptions, there's also a provision for sales tax exemptions for production companies, and the exemption would be for sales of tangible personal property or services constituting production or post-production expenditures purchased for the purpose of a certified project, as well as the sale or installation of machinery and equipment, and the construction, maintenance, repair, or modification of sets, props, scenery, or other facilities constituting production or post-production expenditures. Production companies may obtain project exemption certificates for contractors, and the exemption must be approved and may be limited by the Secretary of Commerce. And no sales tax exemption pursuant to the Act would apply to production or post-production expenditures that were made on or after January 1st of 2035. And then just generally, the Kansas Film and Digital Industry Development Program would be administered by the Secretary of Commerce. And the Act requires the production company to make an application for approval of a production as an eligible production and for designation of as a certified production prior to the commencement of a project or its principal photography. They also need to provide evidence of adequate financing and certain levels of general liability insurance. They need to provide descriptions of the project and an economic impact study or impact statement to the Secretary. If the application is approved by the Secretary of Commerce, the production company is required to enter into an agreement with the Secretary on the terms the Secretary requires and must agree to provide documentation and information as needed, to cooperate with any audits, and agree to the termination of tax credits and the sales tax exemption, and agree to repayment terms if the terms of the agreement or the requirements of the Act are not met. Also, the Secretary of Commerce and the Secretary of Revenue may adopt rules and regulations to implement the provisions of the Act. And I'd be happy to stand for questions.
Committee, are there any questions? Yes, Senator Reichman.
Thank you very much, Chairman. Well, you had your work cut out doing all this. I guess my question is, I noticed that we don't have anything like that, and like 30 or so other states have different types of incentives for movie production or film. Do we have a record of what other states give as incentive for them to have one in Kansas?
Mr. Chairman, I am not aware of that, but I think it's something that possibly the research department may be able to put together for the committee if you're interested.
Okay, and then one more question. I look at when they're talking about the fiscal note, it said that the Department of Revenue estimates decrease the state general fund by 10 million in 26 and each future year to 35. So it's, would that be because, I didn't read the whole thing, but is that because of the credits were given to them, or what's the?
The provisions of the bill provide that the income tax credit is only for 10 years. It's for tax years 25 through 34, and the sales tax exemption also would expire after 2034.
Any other questions? Senator Tyson.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, Amelia. And I would echo the senator's comments. You did put a lot of work into this. So does the $10 million limit, is that just for income, or does that include sales tax exemptions also?
That is a provision relating to the income tax credit.
only? So there is no cap on the sales tax?
Correct. But there is a provision, this is a little bit different than some of our sales tax exemptions in the fact that the Secretary of Commerce has some ability to limit what is approved for sales tax exemption.
But not this body, though.
It is not in this bill, correct. There is no limit by the legislature in the bill.
Thank you. And if I would, it says it's transferable and carry forward. It's a sweet deal. If you would explain to the committee what that means, thank you.
Mr. Chairman, so the carry forward provisions essentially mean that if the income tax credit that's awarded for expenditures during a particular tax year, if those tax credits exceed their Kansas income tax liability, those excess credits that have not been used can be used in future tax years as an offset, as a deduction against their Kansas income tax. And the provision allows that carry forward for up to 10 years. There's also provisions for the transferability of the tax credits, so they could be transferred to someone else in exchange for some consideration, so that another entity or transferee could use those tax credits.
Any other questions? Is there, in some of our star bonds type legislation, we have included the income from the people, or if the actors were in Kansas, would the income tax that they earned during, or the income they earned during filming of that film be taxable in Kansas?
I would have to look into that a little bit more, but I think if the work is performed in the state, of Kansas, there may be some income tax liability there for the work performed in Kansas, whether or not they are a Kansas resident.
Some of our conferees can tell us.
Yeah.
Any other questions? Yes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and yes, thank you for your hard work. So it says that the digital media production producing in Kansas, are the owners in Kansas, or do they, where would the owners of this production company reside? It says it has to be produced in Kansas to get the tax. So would it technically mean that they would have to be from Kansas or no?
I could double check, but I don't believe for the general income tax credit or the sales tax exemption, there's a requirement that the production company be a Kansas-based production company, but there is at least one income tax credit provision that would be applicable to such a Kansas-based production company. But there are requirements about where the expenditures are being made and that they're being made in Kansas.
Senator Cluse, it does say in this document here that include the requirement that at least 10% of the total tax credits approved each year would be for a Kansas-based production company. Not sure where that goes from there. Any other questions? Thank you, Amelia. We appreciate your work there. So we do have 5 proponents. You'll see in your packet or online that you do have written only, and we do have a neutral. So we will call the first proponent, and if you would, the neutral is written only also. So the first proponent, Mr. Stuart Little.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Is this on? Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Stuart Little with Little Government Relations here on behalf of organization Grow Kansas Film. I'm just going to give you the highlights. There's a group of people that work in this business here in Kansas who will be able to touch on a lot of these details and do a lot more explanation. I'm going to make a couple of points here and then pass off to them. I thank you for having this hearing, listening to this. A couple of things. The policy provisions in this bill passed the legislature during the 2024 legislation. It was in the conference committee. It passed the House 102 to 22 and the Senate 32 to 5. It went to the governor. It went at the end of sine die along with other tax bills, and all of those were vetoed. And then we came back for the special session and passed the tax reduction bill that everybody passed. This would have been overridden. This would already be law, but for it being vetoed. I know that I'm happy to talk through some of these points. This is essentially based on kind of the fundamental tax credit that exists in 40 other states, 39 or 40 other states. You come in, you spend money on a production in a state, you do the qualified expenditures, you follow the rules, you get an audit, you get done, you can collect 30% of a tax credit, and you can do all or a portion or any of those parts of your production or television or movie in the state. And it is a common practice that is growing in size. And some of these people that work in the business will be able to talk about that a little bit more. I would note as well that you're going to hear from a couple of folks who are involved. This is in some ways like an arts issue, an entertainment issue. It's a business issue. This is an issue that you're going to hear from Mr. Rhodes, who works in the business and represents an organization where this is going to be a benefit to a new business that's been brought to Kansas. You can see in the written testimony from a gentleman named Joshua Wexler, who is investing in a studio facility in Salina at K-State Salina. Check out his testimony. This is an important part of what would be possible for him. This is all related to a business. It has to do with art, but we're not in that business right now. If you look at the back side of my testimony, the back page, I hope you all got it in color because I wanted it to be preserved forever in the records. And if it's black and white, I apologize. This is a production taking place at Duff's Ranch, north of Scott City. Senator Reichman, Senator Blue, I'm sure you know exactly where that is. This was a $5 to $10 million production that was filmed out there in August. And they're doing other filming here in the state of Kansas. The production company, the director went to Arkansas. Arkansas film tax all used up. There are no credits in Arkansas. Goes to Oklahoma, no tax credits in Oklahoma. The only reason he's here is he's a Kansas resident. He said, if I'm not getting a tax credit, I'm going to spend my money here. So 3 days out, and for this one setup here, this is the crew, this is who shows up to make a movie out in Scott City, Kansas for 3 days. They stay in Garden City for 3 or 4 nights. They're eating, they're traveling, they're renting, they're paying for all those kind of things. 30 cars and trucks in the parking lot, not in the parking lot, in the field, because they're filming buffalo and a buffalo hunt. 7 cars are from Kansas. Those were craft service, meaning the people that brought the food, and the horse wranglers. Every other person, professional working on that film, came from Oklahoma or Arkansas because they have film tax credits and they have an industry there and we don't, and all our kids are going to work there. And this is why there's value in doing this. This production is going to begin filming again in Cowtown at some point. And there will be more people coming from other states to do the work in Kansas. So I'll let the other folks talk, but it is about entertainment. It is about doing the things that you all like to watch on television, but it is a business that we are not participating in right now. I'd be happy to stand for questions at the appropriate time.
Thank you. Okay, the next proponent, Kiki Bush. Welcome to the committee.
Thank you, Chairman Alley and members of the committee. My name is Kristen Bush, although most people call me by my nickname Kiki, and 2 years ago I had the honor of speaking here in favor of film tax incentives. As a brief recap, I'm a professional actor who's been in over 50 films, TV shows, and plays, including on HBO, NBC, and at the Lincoln Center. I've been directed by Oscar and Tony winners. I've acted with many household names, and Meryl Streep has praised my acting twice to my face. During the pandemic, I moved back to rural Kansas, where I met my writer husband and stayed to create a life together. Today, I'm going to give you the world's shortest crash course in independent film production, just in case you've never made a movie yourselves. Here are the bare necessities. You'll need to raise a lot of money. You'll need actors, crew, equipment, locations. You'll need local businesses to help feed, house, and transport your cast and crew. Easy, right? Not quite, but this is precisely what I did since moving back home. I raised tens of thousands of dollars, largely made up of small donations from rural Kansas women. I cast Kansas-born actors living in New York City and flew them home. I hired a crew. We shot on location at my family's horse ranch in rural Saline County, and I spent thousands of dollars on local hotels, Airbnbs, caterers, restaurants, grocery stores, and diners. Now, I didn't have Martin Scorsese's budget, but much of what I did have went straight back into the Saline County economy. Mercifully, the Kansas weather cooperated during our filming, and I now have a final cut of the game camera, which we showed in the Capitol Auditorium last week on Kansas Day. Now, some might say, look, she made a movie without tax incentives. And you're right, I did. Past tense. I can't afford to make a future one without them. Some others might say, we don't need Hollywood here, they'll just go back to LA once filming is done. Not true. For the last decade, the film industry has been decentralizing out of LA, and those fires last month will push even more filmmakers out. With this exodus, it bears remembering that tax incentives are, by a long shot, the #1 reason for choosing film locations. I want to close by highlighting a dilemma that one of my hardest working crew members is facing. Isaiah Marcotte is a filmmaker in his own right from Salina, and he's grappling with the decision to stay in Kansas or to follow the work to other states. He told me, "It's just so hard to stay here and make a living in my craft. It would be much easier to leave, but this is my home." I identify with this completely. Professionally, it would behoove me to move back to New York City, or Atlanta, or Oklahoma, or even the KC side of Missouri, which due to its tax incentives scored big with the Hallmark movie A Chief's Love Story, which spent $1.5 million in KC Mo. That's one movie alone. Kansas does not make it easy for its creative young people to stay here. We're unwilling to staunch the creative brain drain by actively telling our kids that it's better for them to move away. Without incentives, they probably will. This is my home that I love, and I believe that our landscapes and our people's stories are worthy enough to compete with other states, that our stories are worthy enough to film. With your help, we can tell our own stories here in Kansas. Thank you.
If there's any questions, we'll get those later after testimony. Next one will be Justin Robar. Thank you.
Here today. I'm Justin Rohrbaugh. I'm the director of the School of Digital Arts and Shocker Studios at Wichita State University. I thank you so much for the time to be able to talk to you about this. I was here a couple of years ago and spoke about what we were doing. And so a lot of what I'm going to tell you today is an update from how our program has grown and what we're doing in the creative class here in Kansas. Back in 2017, the Bachelor of Applied Arts and Media Arts was approved by the Kansas Board of Regents, and it created a degree that was the only one of its kind in the United States. And it brought animation, audio production, filmmaking, game design, all together under one roof. In 2019, we formally founded the School of Digital Arts. The upper administration at Wichita State gave me a challenge when we first started, and they said, for this to be successful by year 5, you need to have at least 65 students. Year 1, I had 97. Right now I have 550. It is projected that 4 years from now we'll have over 1,000 students in our school. We're growing gangbusters because our young creative talent is wanting to create in this space. film, digital production, virtual production. They're doing all of these things. We've grown so much. In fact, we're having to expand our location. We started out in 35,000 square feet. We're expanding to, I want to say, around 52,000 for the start of this next school year. Just this summer, I entered a new public-private partnership with Justin McClure Creative to create what's known as synthetic scenes. It's a virtual production. So essentially, it's this massive LED wall that they use in a lot of Hollywood productions, to where if I want to film something and I want to do it in Egypt, I don't have to go to Egypt. I can come down to Shocker Studios at Wichita State, film it inside a building. And people will say, well, what about the weather? Well, we've had it snow in there already. We put up snow machines and did an alpine scene. So the capabilities are there, and we're training these students to do these really amazing things. This current semester, I have 155 students. They're in some type of practicum. Wichita State is really big on paid applied learning and getting students active work, getting them busy in the industry. 155 students doing practicum this semester is huge. This year, I will have right around 80 students that graduate from our program. There's one significant piece that's missing in Kansas, though. We do not have regular film and television production opportunities. So this incentive would help to bring those opportunities to life for these students. So they work on small productions, but to see a real set and real production might help keep them in Kansas. The impact to those students would be immeasurable. One of our recent collaborations with Cowie Lim, she's an executive producer from Pasadena. She's a former graduate of Wichita State, went out to Hollywood to make it big. She was back in town, gave me a call and said, I want to come see your place. And she came and she saw our virtual production. She said, wow, I want to work with you. She fired her company in LA, hired us. She goes, I'd love to film in Kansas, but I can't. But I can do piecework, and I definitely want to come and work with you guys. My big concern is we're going to train all these students how to produce this amazing work, and they're all going to leave. We're not keeping them here in Kansas. And it really breaks my heart. Mom and Dad always say to me, can my kids stay in Kansas? And I have to say, maybe. I'd love to keep these kids in Kansas. I'd love to see them working here. I'd love to see what we could build for infrastructure to make this happen. With your help, we can make this a reality. Thank you for your time today.
Thank you. Next proponent, Mr. Justin Begnaw. Justin?
Senate Committee, nice job on that name pronunciation. I know it's tough. Members of the committee and Mr. Chairman, my name is Justin Begnaw. I'm a Kansas resident. I'm also a film and television and digital media producer. What does a producer do? Well, as a producer, I help find projects and I'll adapt books, articles, other stories, and I'll make them into feature films or television screenplays. I help bring these projects to life. I also hire the actors and I hire the crew, such as the director, the camera person, lighting crew, set building crew, costume designers, hair and makeup artists, wardrobe, grips, gaffers, and anyone else on set, including Kiki. I also hire the editor, the colorist, the sound designer, the motion graphic artists, the animators, the sound mixers, visual effects professionals, and I hire vendors for food, beverage, catering, truck rentals, car rentals, heavy equipment like cherry pickers or cranes, forklifts. I also hire other construction workers to help build sets. And I help build hotels, or I help book hotels, make travel arrangements, and I help plan events. A producer is also instrumental in finding the location to make the movie or television series. This can be a warehouse, a sound stage, somebody's home, a small business like a coffee shop or a flower shop. This can be an exterior location like the Flint Hills or Dodge City or St. Mary's or Division Ranch or Cottonwood Falls or the Western Prairies. Other instrumental component of the producer is to find the money. This can be tough. This can be in the form of a private investor, rich uncle, a dentist. It can be in the form of grants or gifts in kinds, bank loans against distribution contracts, and state tax incentives. These last two are key to what a producer does. Find the location and find the money. Many times, these are one and the same. Finding a location with a tax incentive is a win-win for the producer. Kansas does not have any form of tax incentive, and because of this, our beautiful state and gorgeous locations and hardworking crews have simply been overlooked, a flyover. I was born in Kansas City, and when I graduated high school and wanted to pursue a college degree and a career in film and television, I had to leave this region. There was nothing for me here. After college, I moved to New York City, not back home to Kansas, because NBC, the History Channel, MTV Networks, the Tribeca Film Institute, all of which are places I worked in my young career, were all located in New York, not in Kansas. I later moved to Los Angeles and worked for Universal Pictures and produced films for Netflix, MGM, Fox Searchlight, and a few other studios. I worked for a completion bond company called Film Finances, and later a film tax credit lender called Grosvenor Park. I worked on dozens of television series and worked on over 400 feature films. I've made movies in over 30 different states here in the United States and close to 20 different countries around the world, but not one in Kansas. Why is that? 0 tax incentives. I'm now a proud Kansas resident. I recently moved my family back here, and I know we have a growing crew base. We have top quality vendors and service industry providers, but sadly, not the one tool I know from experience that will work. Kansas has never been part of these conversations. I'm here today to help change that. There's never been a better time to provide a tax incentive to film here in Kansas. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Appreciate that. Our last proponent is Sean Rhodes. Sean, welcome to committee.
To support our film and media clients in the United Kingdom and the United States. So to give you some perspective, UVNS has 50 acres equaling over 140 football field size vaults, 650 feet underground in the Hutchinson salt mine, of which many of these vaults are filled with millions of motion picture films and commercial television programs, as well as archival video, audio, and historical assets. Our clients are among the biggest name in the entertainment business. My job is to duplicate the London Restore operations at the highest quality levels, scan the film at resolutions of 4K to 13K, restore, color correct, and preserve the film for the next generations. In the last few months, UVS has made significant investment in state-of-the-art film digitization and preservation lab in Wichita. With an enormous task ahead of us and the volume of film we are responsible for, we will greatly need to scale our operation by offering internships and hiring qualified people. We have an interest in supporting the bill to encourage the filmmaking infrastructure here in Kansas, and our plan is to further expand our services to help the film industry grow and develop in our state. As a longtime independent filmmaker, my last film won an Emmy for Best Historical Documentary last year. I've been personally invested in making this happen for the community of filmmakers and businesses in Wichita and the state of Kansas. It will be a winning situation for everybody involved. For the last 15 years, I have been involved with productions of film and television productions coming to our state. The first question they always ask me when I field these phone calls is, do you have tax incentives? And I always have to say, unfortunately, no, we don't. They hang up the phone on me. That's the end of the conversation right there, unfortunately. Thanks for your time. Goodbye. If we do not have the tax incentives in place, the business of filmmaking will go to another state. If they go to another state, so will the money. If film productions get a percentage of the tax dollars that they spend in Kansas back, the state will still benefit by collecting tax dollars that would otherwise go to another state. That includes the money the film industry will be spending on hiring local crews who pay their income taxes to the state of Kansas. The filmmakers from outside the state will be frequenting our restaurants, hotels, grocery stores, laundromats, shops, and the list goes on and on. Cowtown, for one, will probably be booked 365 days a year and profit off of the filming of popular Westerns. And just to add something in here, they have built now 4 Western studios in New Mexico who has $1 billion in their tax incentive program. And they are full 365 days a year. The same thing will happen here. Our Shocker Studios and other college graduates from our other universities will have to leave the state in order to get a job. So there's a tremendous brain drain that we have going on here. This is all just the tip of the iceberg. If the state gives back 30% of the qualified tax revenue collected to the filmmakers, the state of Kansas will keep 70% of the funds collected. 70% of zero funds collected equals zero. Without this bill passing, we will be at a disadvantage to our surrounding states. Allow us filmmakers to have a level playing field so that we might compete with our own skills and talent instead of forcing us to leave to get a job in another state working our craft. We can build this money-making industry right here in Kansas, and it will benefit all Kansans. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Committee, do we have questions? Sure you have questions. Dietrich.
Thank you so much for being here. So the bill that we heard last year in Senate Commerce, how has that changed? How has this bill changed from that bill? Is it the same bill? Can somebody talk to or speak to the changes?
Thank you. The bill that came out of Senate Commerce, it was actually in 23. It came out at the 23. We worked it in the House and Senate in 23, got over to the House and sat through the 24 session and then was brought up at the end. The difference in that version of the bill and the bill that was passed in the conference committee report at the end of 24 was that the transferability was restored. The committee removed transferability, and for just a simple carry forward, someone who doesn't incur a tax liability in the state, if we're talking about business entities coming up and filming in your district or your hometown, that's not helpful for them, and that's almost just the same as saying we don't have a tax credit. It's not going to be usable for these kind of folks that are saying we want to do some work here, some work there. So the transferability was restored in the conference committee report.
Senator Corson.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. A couple folks alluded to a bit. I know the statement was made that we're trying to be competitive with the 40 other states that offer an incentive. Do you have, can anybody talk about, or maybe we could send around later, a sense of what other states are doing, especially what our neighboring states are, and how this bill would compare to what is offered by surrounding states? I would just be curious kind of how this bill in its key areas looks compared to our neighboring states.
Literally right next door. Thank you. Right next door. Missouri just passed theirs, and they have in the range of 20 to 40, which is kind of ours, 30 to 40, and they have $16 million in their tax credit. Oklahoma, as I put in my testimony, they've had a tax credit for a long time. It was 30, just this last year, it went to 80 million. They now have 80 million in their tax credit in Oklahoma. So just those two next door and kind of the closest to us, that's where they have. There's I can get you, I have a map, a giant map that shows every incentive in every state, and I'll get an updated version of that and provide it to the members of the committee too.
Great, thank you,
Nebraska and
Mr. Chair.
Colorado as well. Yeah.
Thank you, Stuart. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Senator Owens.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I've got a shout out to my good old buddy Sean Rhodes from Hessen. Man, has it been a minute. So good to see you. I remember those days long ago. Question probably for Stuart. Seems to be leading kind of the charge on this. Is there Is there any expectation, and I asked this when we were talking about the sales tax exemption for the data centers the other day, about, ensuring where applicable, we're spending our money locally. I want to make sure that anytime we consider tax advantages or tax discounts or incentives or exemptions, that we're making sure that the focus is on our small businesses and our businesses in Kansas. Is there anything like that or any expectation along those lines?
Talking where folks have made movies is that depending on where you are and where you're moving and the mobility, unless you're encamped doing something, a series maybe, if you get a series, it's a whole different world, but you're working with a lot of different vendors and you're taking who can be, and getting those engagements, who can be helpful and serve your purposes. And it may be in Garden City, Cowtown, Scott City, all on one set of shootings there. So it's rare because for a production, and these guys can talk about it more like, but for a production that come in, they're not bringing a lot with them. They're moving fast and light with their technical crew and those kind of things. So does that make sense?
Eric, do you have something to add?
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chairman. A couple of the changes that were made to the previous version of this bill incorporated some of that idea of making, applying some of the credit in particular to activities and production companies that are in the state. So one of the changes was that, and this is all present in the current version of the bill, instead of just having a single tax credit, they made 2 tax credits with different with different requirements to qualify for the credit. The base credit for kind of the general credit is 30% of expenditures, and then for Kansas-based production companies, the thresholds for qualification are lower, so the dollar amount that has to be invested is lower, and then but the base credit is 25%, and then it has a total of up to 40%, and so there are a couple of ways that companies or productions can get additional credits. One of them is by being a repeat claimant of the credit. So if it's claimed more than 1 year in a row, they get an additional 5%. But then the other 2 are, or one of the other ways that a company can get an additional 5% credit is for having a higher amount of the crew hired from within the state. So for 50% of the cast or crew being based in the state, there's an additional 5% credit.
Oh, thank you. That is incredibly helpful. Only last question that I have is, if we were to pass this, is there any way that I could get a cameo appearance riding a buffalo in a movie? It's one of those. Absolutely. Oh. I don't know. I'm just saying. It's just seems a little crazy. But anyway, thank you.
Any other questions? I had the pleasure of going through Shocker Studios and seeing what they do in Shocker Studios. They mentioned some part of the testimony, and I don't remember where I've seen it, but gaming. Is gaming part of this bill?
We're talking about gaming, video gaming, not gaming wagering.
Absolutely.
Yeah, that is part of what is involved in there. The language in there about the production types that are eligible productions are everything from, you guys know the term, the VR and the XR and the gaming and all those different kind of things are all components of that, because that's what folks are looking for these days. So it is in there.
And then the last question that I'll ask Stuart is the one I'd ask Emilio. In some of the star bonds legislation I've seen, if you work in Kansas and you are from out of state, you come in to work in Kansas for a particular time, even if it's 1 day, the income tax which you are charged for that day stays in Kansas. Is that part of this bill?
So, yeah, the way the way the production works, and Sean or somebody grab me if I'm wrong, is that somebody that's going to come in and do something, they're going to create an entity, a legal entity, an LLC here to do that. So they're going to be doing payroll taxes, they're going to have the insurance, they've got to do all those kinds of things. Their insurance folks won't let them do that unless they do that. So, yeah, and that is one of the things that is collected as well, as employment taxes and all those kind of things. It won't be for like someone's entire salary, it will be a portion for when they're in the state, correct?
Kansas.
Is that right?
That's correct. Thank you. Any other questions? Committee, we do have written proponents and we do have a written neutral. Please read those. And is there anything else before the committee today? Seeing none, we are adjourned. Thank you very much for being here.